Hey, everybody. Well, welcome to this next podcast, Let's Talk from Relentless Endeavor, a podcast to get the generations talking. And this time we're going to talk about the word risk. So I've thought of three phrases that are cornerstones of thought for older generations that have to do with risk. And so we're going to discuss each of these phrases and get a millennial's perspective and my perspective, which would be Gen X. So, as we dialogue about each of these, our goal is to help each generation understand the other and why they feel and think the way they do about this topic of risk. So, the first phrase is one that I have heard my whole life: better safe than sorry. So, on one level, it makes complete sense. You know, when you're dealing with physical safety. So, the parent tells you don't put your hand on a hot stove, it is better to be safe than sorry. That's actually good advice. But if that phrase leaks into other areas of your life, that can also translate into don't try out for that team, don't apply for that job, don't risk rejection by asking that person out on a date, or don't start that new business. So that's from my perspective. We did care a lot about being safe. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure where that came from. Maybe it was what was going on in the world. And so we were all about being safe and being careful. It was during the Cold War. But Peter, I would love to know your response when you hear the words better safe than sorry, other than the noise that you just made when you went, ah.
Yeah. So the first thing that comes to mind when I hear that phrase is two things kind of hit simultaneously. First, you can't guarantee your own safety. You can do your best to mitigate risk in the interest of safety, but at the end of the day, because you can't control 100% of your world necessarily, there's only so safe you're ever going to be, which is difficult to think about at times.
Sure.
But better safe than sorry. The other thing that comes to mind is, well, safe in what way? Because if it's better safe than sorry, that turns into, like, what are we talking about? Are we talking about physical safety? Because if we're talking about physical safety, then you can't leave your house. If it is always better to be safe than sorry, you can't leave your house. You can't try new food. You can't drive a car.
Like finances. So, let's say it's the area of finances.
Well, so that's what I'm getting to is we have to define the word like safe, like that phrase. Better be safe than sorry is kind of like an umbrella phrase that's used in a lot of different areas. But most of the time, what it means is don't risk your money, don't risk your emotions, and don't risk your lifestyle. Those are kind of the three that it basically means. Like you said, don't try out for that team. When people are applying for college, if you're a senior in high school, you're applying for colleges, and the idea of a safety school is there. It's the school that's there as your backup, kind of a thing. So when we're talking about finances, better safe than sorry, well, that can mean different things at different levels. If you've got $1 million in the bank and you've got the opportunity to invest $10,000, well, okay, better safe than sorry. Yeah, you might lose $10,000 on an investment, but fractionally, that's not a huge risk. But if it's 500,000, okay, that's a very different situation. If you've only got $10 to your name, better be safe than sorry. If it's going to put you out on the street, then yeah, I would say that makes sense. In my experience, though, that phrase is typically used as a placeholder for don't get your hopes up.
Oh, we're going to get to that one.
Okay.
So we're actually going to get to that one too.
So better safe than sorry. A lot of the time what that means when I hear it is people are talking and they're saying, better be safe than sorry. Have a job before you get a new job. Don't just leave a job because it's bad. Don't just work on, go ahead and keep working at that job, interview other places, get another, do all that. don't take the leap necessarily. Even other, some people will start their own business while they're working a job. Better safe than sorry. Yeah, in that instance, potentially right, because if you're not sure if your business is going to succeed at the level you need it to, it's better to have the safety net of a job in that instance. But what I see is better safe than sorry when it comes to job and finances typically means I don't think you should take that risk. And when someone says that, better safe than sorry, what they mean is don't do it.
I think
So,
you're absolutely right. It's kind of a way of saying I don't think you should do that thing.
exactly. So when someone
Yeah.
says, better safe than sorry in regards to starting a new business, starting a new venture, doing something outside the norm, it means I don't think it either means I don't think you can do it, or I don't want to see you go through something difficult, which I can understand not wanting to see somebody go through something difficult. But at the same time, life is difficult.
Oh,
It just,
sure.
it is. So,
Well,
better
all the
safe than
best
sorry.
adventures have come from people being willing to maybe not be safe. I mean, the
Yeah.
first
And
people that ventured into space, you know, the first
yeah.
people that, tried any invention, the Wright brothers flying. I mean, and someone running for an office and standing up for injustice around the world. It's all risky, and
Hmm.
it would be easier to just stay safe. But I think a lot of parents say that because we don't want to see our kids get hurt.
Hmm.
But the downside is that the best trials in life, the things that make us stronger, are the things that we're willing to step out and risk. And that's where most of the reward is in going after that thing
Hmm.
that's scary.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one of the other things is it's better safe than sorry in my experience is typically around don't leave that job to do your own thing. Don't leave that job to start that business. Don't leave that job without having another one to back it up. But already, like, that's kind of the thing. And I think as a millennial, I remember 9/11.
Sure.
I don't remember flying before 9/11 because I didn't, but I remember 9/11 and I remember the housing crisis of 2008. And I graduated high school in 2011. So 2008, I was in middle school. So I was just really starting to kind of like understand some different things about money, like as a concept. I didn't
Sure.
have a job, but I was able to look at the world and go, there's a whole bunch of people that are
Really
swinging for
upset
the
right now.
fences and not make it. Like they were swinging for the
Yeah.
fences, and when they had corked bats, it worked. And now that they've got, now that they can't, it's not going to work. So when I hear, better safe than sorry, safe isn't there in the same context. Kind of like we were talking about, like a job used to be safe.
Yeah.
To a lot of people, having a job is safe, especially people in the generation, Gen X, Boomer, that kind of age bracket. But I looked at the economy fall apart in 2008 as a middle schooler and realized that a job isn't a guarantee of anything.
No.
And
And
seeing
previous generations saw that too, actually. It's
right,
just
but that it was not in their formative years
right. Well,
that they
that's
experienced it. Um, and then the other part of it is um, like companies aren't built to last anymore. Like, they used to make vacuums in the 50s that you could throw a hand grenade at and it wouldn't get a dent even. And now you can't hardly buy a vacuum and have it last more than a couple of years. It's it's called planned obsolescence, where manufacturers are like, oh darn, if our vacuum works for 50 years, then eventually we'll run out of people to sell vacuums to. So they plan to have their stuff fall apart. Apple's really good at that. But one of the other things is companies are set up that way too, especially like technology based companies. You go to Silicon Valley, you start your company, and your whole goal is to start your company, raise a bunch of money, not make a bunch of money, raise a bunch of money with the intention of having your company bought by someone else. You're not
Oh,
there
gosh.
for the long haul necessarily. The
Okay.
idea of passing a business on to someone else in your family, that concept isn't really around anymore. Part of that is because the world is it's a global market compared to what it used to be.
Hmm.
The world is much more dynamic. It shifts a lot faster, but also having a job allows you to have more quote work life balance, if you will, where you can go to work and you can clock in and you can get your paycheck and you can come home to your family. Whereas, say, business ownership, you're always on. Like,
Oh, yeah.
especially at the beginning, like eventually you get to the point theoretically where you've hired enough people, you have enough associates that you're able to do things. You're able to kind of step back a little bit and focus on you and your family, but not necessarily. The law firm I used to work at, those guys are still doing it because they never found anybody willing to put up with them long enough to train them to take over. So my former boss is, I guess he's probably getting close-ish to 70. He's got nobody behind him.
Yeah.
Nobody's coming behind him to pick up the slack or anything. So he's just going to work. He didn't have a
That's going to be a
choice.
topic for another podcast, is the whole idea of succession
Yeah.
and bringing in
So
people behind you. I do want to talk about that sometime too.
yeah. So I would say safety. You're not just like better safe than sorry. It's safer for you, but then it also leaves a lot more up to chance for the generations after you. If you have a
It's
general
true.
store that you are running in your town and you know you work long hours at it, but eventually it's profitable, and then you're able to have your kids start working there, and then maybe you pass it on to them. Like, that idea isn't there, and a lot of kids, because what a lot of kids will see in situations like that, and it's not just like running a general store, it's just kind of the picture I have in my head, but a lot of lawyers don't like the way their life looks, so they tell their kids, don't go to law school. Same
Mm.
thing with doctors. They see the way their life looks and they're like, I want better for my kid. Hey kid, don't go to med school. This is like this this is really terrible, and there's things about it I would change. So I want something better for you. So I think that better safe than sorry, it comes from a place of well-meaning,
Sure.
but also wanting better for the person you're saying it to, and you think that that path, that potentially dangerous path, if you will, is not necessarily going to lead to something better, or it's
Okay.
just unclear what it's going to lead to, and that lack of clarity is enough for people to say, hold on, pump the brakes.
That's probably,
And
yeah.
so I think that's where a lot
The
of it comes
unknown, risking the unknown
from. Hmm.
is a hard piece. Okay, well, the second phrase kind of it dovetails into this, but it can be a little bit different, especially um, if you're thinking in the context of faith and our belief in what God has told us to do and to be as Christians. So the second phrase is just be careful. Like, yeah, okay, go ahead, but just be careful. Um, and what I thought when I have heard this in the past, and I grew up with all of these phrases. So, but just be careful. A lot of times, I think is hard because as Christians, it made me think of that time when Jesus is talking about what's going to happen to him, and he says, I'm going to have to be arrested and I'm going to be killed, and I will rise again on the third day. And Peter pulls him aside and says, "Never, Lord, that will never happen to you." And basically, he's saying, "No, no, be careful. Just be careful. I don't want that to happen to you." And
Hmm.
and Jesus goes on to say, some pretty hard things um, that necessarily were not safe at all. He said, "If anyone would follow me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow
Hmm.
me." Well, that's not
Yeah.
being care. That wouldn't be. That's pretty risky, right?
Yeah.
Or even in Matthew 5, he says, "Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me." Well, that's not safe at all. um, that's not being careful. And so the being, just be careful would be, don't speak out. Don't ruffle anybody's feathers. Don't stand up for that thing, which could be your faith.
Mm-hmm.
Um, don't become a missionary. Don't give your money away. Don't help the person on the street. Don't give food to that guy with a sign. All of the things. Just be careful. So I think as Christians, we have to have, a little bit different conversation about what does it mean when we say just be careful? Are we trying to get someone to stop doing something? Or when someone says something to us, how does that play out in the church if we're just trying to be careful? So I'd love to know
Yeah.
from you, Peter, what do you see that phrase having a negative impact in the lives of Christians,
Oh
or
yeah.
in the church in general in our country right now?
Yeah, and I definitely see it having a negative impact. And I think a lot of it comes from, again, people not having the same definition of what it means, which is why I'm glad we're having this conversation. Because um, I just learned earlier today, I learned Elevation Church, big church, is not using the word resurrection on any of their like handouts or promo for their Easter service. They're not using the word resurrection. Now they're going to talk about it in the service because that's what Easter is, but they're not using that word. And some people are saying, "Oh, that's stupid. Like it's Resurrection Sunday. Use the word." Okay, there's so many different levels to go with that. They're to an extent they're playing it safe. They're being careful with their messaging because they want to get people in the doors. Okay, so I guess in that sense, just be careful has a good idea behind it, but there's other people that are seeing that like it's a very definitive decision, and they're seeing that decision and they're like, okay, but you're you're robbing people of the gospel like on a pamphlet.
Hmm.
First of all, I don't know the last time a pamphlet worked for gospel presentation, frankly. Probably not in the last 20 years or so, but it's kind of an interesting thing to like decide to just be careful on, because they're being careful on a pamphlet that's going to lead to something else anyway. You
Okay.
know what I mean? So like they're being careful to get people in the door, but then it's not like they're going to be careful in their service. Now, if they're going to be careful in their service and not use the word resurrection, that's an entirely different problem, a
Right.
different level of being too careful. That's watering down the gospel, and I'm not here for that. But just be careful. Let's I can understand the I can again a lot of these I can understand the heart behind it is not wanting somebody to get hurt,
Hmm.
or obviously like be careful. I don't want you to get hurt. That's what you're saying. Um, but the way it walks out in faith is we have too many Christians that are being careful.
Yeah, I would
Um,
agree with that.
People are being they're being too careful. They're not taking risks. They're focusing on um, temporary things. It's interesting when you look at things through the lens of eternity, getting hurt here doesn't hardly mean anything when
Yeah.
you're looking at it through an eternal lens. Oh, but you might get hurt. Okay, I'm not going to be in this body forever. You know,
Yeah.
um,
Well,
you're going to get
Jesus
a
just
new.
said, "Blessed are you if this happens to you."
Yeah. So
So.
that sets up an interesting framework where it's like just be careful, and the backside of that is don't be blessed. Ooh, that's hard to think about when you say just be careful,
Hmm.
don't be blessed, because we have the path to being blessed in this situation where you have to take a risk and you have to potentially get hurt. So it's like, just be careful. Are you robbing somebody of a blessing because ooh, that's not fun to think about. You know what I mean? So I
Yeah.
think,
I wonder if we
in,
also say that because we don't really trust the person has thought through all the ramifications of what they're going to do, which is, it's possible. I'm that person who you grew up with me. So I am giving people, I'm buying McDonald's for the guy standing on the street who's homeless and giving him a meal.
Hmm.
I am reaching out my window with uh, some kind of a energy bar or a cold bottle of water, because it's not my job if they're fleecing me or not. My
Hmm.
$2 I hand out the window, if it buys them a hamburger, it buys them a hamburger. If it buys them cigarettes, well, it's not going to buy them cigarettes. That's too expensive. But if people have said, well, you don't know what they're going to use it for. Like, well, I'm not responsible for what they're using it for. I'm supposed to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, visit those in prison, take care of the sick. That's what we're supposed to do. I'm not responsible for the other end of it. But I have heard that a lot. Well, just be careful. And I think people are worried that, the flip side of that is I could hand something to someone out the window and they could be mean, or they could try to hurt me. And I'm careful. It's not like I'm, mostly I'm not doing it when I'm by myself, but I don't
Right.
think handing an umbrella to some poor guy standing in the rain trying to, eke out a living, is really going to be that harmful. But I think we say be careful because we're thinking you probably haven't thought all the ramifications of what might happen. So pay attention as you're going through this thing. So it
Yeah.
has good intentions behind it. I don't know we're necessarily trying to get people to stop doing something, but I think we don't think that they've possibly thought through every
Right.
step.
Well, I
So,
think a lot of it, when someone said, like, if you have the homeless kits where it's got socks and toothbrush and toothpaste and
right,
stuff like that in it, if someone knows you're handing that out, I feel like they're less likely to say, just be careful, because it shows, well, for a couple of reasons. One, I think part of it is you're not just giving them money. So it removes that excuse of, well, what if they go buy alcohol with it?
right,
E- Last I checked, liquor stores don't take toothpaste as a form of currency.
right,
So you're
right.
you're helping the need directly. And second, it shows that you have put thought into it. What does this person need? They need an umbrella. They need socks. They need a toothbrush. They need toothpaste. They need an energy bar. They need a bottle of water. Like, you're helping the need immediately. Um, so when someone says, just be careful, and the backside of that one is, I don't know that you've thought this through. If you're handing out a kit, you've clearly put more thought into it. You're not just handing
Right.
$2 out the window or whatever. So I think, um, the spirit in which somebody says something matters a lot, and being able to show that you have, being able to address the second half of the sentence, basically,
Right.
just be careful with your money. Well, I'm not giving him money. I'm giving him something that I've already bought. I'm giving him an umbrella.
Mm,
Just be careful. If someone's like genuinely worried about like your safety for rolling down your window, well, if someone is okay with you driving through that area, but not okay with you rolling down your window in that area, that's an issue for them. If
yeah.
someone says, just be careful because of like the physical location, like the neighborhood you're in, okay, I can understand that depending on
Yeah.
where it is.
Yeah. I mean, I've told
But
you
it's,
guys to be careful, but
mhm,
what I'm really saying is I care about you and I want
mhm,
you to be safe. But
yes,
I also don't want it to stop people from doing things that they're called to do or to go places that they're called to go. Because if we were all just
right,
to be careful, we would stay in our homes and not go out anywhere. So,
mhm,
um, okay, well, I want to get to the last one because you started there early on. This is a biggie,
okay,
um, and I think it's really sad, actually. But that's the phrase: "Don't get your hopes up."
yeah,
And I have had to fight that my whole life. Um, and I think from my generation, it's really said to keep from being disappointed. And I'm trying to figure out what big disappointment hit the boomers. Maybe it was things that were happening in government as we were growing up, things that were happening around the world, but just this whole well, don't get your hopes up because it may not go the way you want it to go. But I think sometimes we say that even because we don't want to be disappointed by people that we trust. And as Christians, we say that because there's a chance that we think God might disappoint us. And
Mm-hmm.
so if we don't hope for something and we don't risk it, then we're less likely to be hurt, we think. But I just can't help but think we, as Christians, we have a responsibility to get our hope up because of all the people, we have the most reason to have hope. We should actually be out there saying, get your hopes up, get your hopes up, because we have a God who fulfills our hopes and who gives us hope. There's a verse in Proverbs 13 that says, hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a desire fulfilled is a tree of life. And I actually looked that up in the original Hebrew. And basically, it's saying when hope is delayed or put on hold, it literally makes you sick. But
Is
when
that
the
Proverbs
tree is
13 you said?
alive, when that hope is alive,
You said, was that Proverbs 13?
13 verse 12, yeah. But when the tree is alive, desire arrives. The Hebrew actually flips those words around. So to me, that's saying, when we refuse to hope in something, it can literally just make our heart sick. It causes a heartache when we don't believe that God's going to do what he's going to do, or we don't hold out hope for a healing, for a job, for a relationship, for reconciliation to happen. We don't hold out hope, then we just kind of die inside a little bit. But if we keep hope alive, if we keep that thing alive in us, that desire will come. And that's not saying, oh, if I hope I get $1 million, I'm going to believe, then $1 million is going to come walking in my front door. But
Mm-hmm.
but when we do hope and get our hopes up that God's going to move and God's going to do, and our life is going to be good, and he's going to give us good gifts like he promises, then that's where life is. But that whole thing of don't get your hopes up, I just think that is so sad. I would love your take on that, Peter, as far as, have you heard people saying don't get your hopes up? Have I ever said that to you? If I do, I apologize. I don't know that I ever
Um,
did, but I have heard it a lot growing up, and I just think it's one of the saddest things to be told not to be hopeful.
yeah. I can't say that I know of you saying it necessarily. Um, I think it's interesting how the phrase doesn't come out until you're older. Uh, like if a 6-year-old kid says he wants to play in the NBA one day, we're totally down for it.
Oh, right, you support that. You don't tell a 6-year-old, well, don't get your hopes up.
Right, but then if he hits 12 and he's not tall, then we say, oh, don't get your hopes up. You know what I mean? So it's like there's this weird point in like the middle school kind of time frame where it suddenly becomes okay to start saying that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's just like we were talking about better safe than sorry. Don't get your hopes up. I think what people say when they mean that is, I don't want you to get hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Well, two things. One, hope does not guarantee hurt. If you hope to pass your driver's test when you're 16 and you put a lot of effort into it and you know your material, then your hope is well founded and you
Sure.
take the test and you pass. So hope doesn't always equal hurt. You know what I mean? Um, but I think people only pull that phrase out when they doubt the person they're saying it to.
What about if they doubt the God that they're
Well, yeah.
they're wishing to have faith in?
Um, so that's another part of it where it's like, don't get your hopes up. Okay, but if God actually told that person that thing, then who? It's the same thing as when Peter said, "No, Lord, that will never happen," and he said, "Get behind me, Satan," because he was like,
Mm-hmm.
"No, that's not part of the plan." You're trying to ruin the plan right now. It's well-intentioned, but you're trying to ruin the plan, and I can't have that. So
Yeah.
I'm going to be really, really strong with you right now and say, get behind me,
Yeah.
because you're trying to ruin the plan. So if it's actually in God's plan for you specifically, then somebody saying that, first of all, it shouldn't derail you when somebody says that. Second of all, if somebody is saying that, then they're saying that doubt they either doubt God's follow through, or they doubt what he told you. They either think that he's not going to he said it and won't follow through, or he never said it in the first place.
Yeah.
And you just believe it anyway. So it's one of those two things. And I think in my experience, but the other part is, don't get your hopes up. The phrase is designed to stop people from getting hurt, right?
Right.
Well, hurt's going to happen anyway.
Oh, yeah.
Life, to quote the Princess Bride, life is pain. Like it's hard. It is. There's 1,000,004 things that can happen on any given day that can make life really hard. Some of them you're going to see coming, some of them you're not. But your level of hope doesn't necessarily change things that are going to happen like outside your world. Like your level of hope as you drive doesn't necessarily change whether the person next to you is being an idiot or not. What it can do, though, is if you have hope for something better, then when an opportunity presents itself, you can see it in the light in which you're supposed to, and you can act on the opportunity in the way God wants you to.
Yeah.
But if you're walking around with no hope, that same opportunity can present itself and you automatically shut it down. So I think it is not only good and important for Christians to have hope, I think it is our responsibility
I would
to
agree.
have hope and share hope. First of all, the gospel is hope. Second of all, um, if people are looking around and they see Christians walking around with no hope, well, you're the only Bible that a lot of people are ever going to see.
Yeah.
So if you're walking around with no hope and you're like, oh, life is so hard all the time, why on earth would they want to have anything
Right.
to do with Jesus? Because he's
Exactly.
not making your life any better. In fact, he's making it worse.
Exactly. Because now you have a God, but you can't even hope in him. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
You
Well,
got people that
so,
are hoping. You got people that are hoping in the financial markets more than God, and they're sitting in church every Sunday.
yeah. Well, so we recently had a situation in our family where someone had a really hard diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was sharing that with some people, asking them to, really pray, um, some people were really, oh my gosh, yes, we're going to pray, we're going to pray, we're going to pray. But I did have a couple people that almost said, don't get your hopes up. I could tell by the way they were responding. They're like, yeah, that's a really hard one to deal with. My mom had that and it didn't go well. And yeah, you can pray about that, but it didn't come out, don't get your hopes up. But that's definitely the feeling that I got from them. And I had to really, jump into, no, I am going to pray in faith. Jesus honors faith. He said he healed people and he honored their faith when he healed them. And I'm just going to go for broke. And if God says no, God says no. But if I don't ask, he's not going to say yes. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm going for broke here. And I just started, praying my heart out. Um, and I forced myself to get my hope up. God, you're going to get us on the other side of this. She's going to be okay. And I am believing that. And, now we're on the other side of it and we're looking at an absolutely, cancer-free pathology report. So,
Mm-hmm.
I think, gosh, it is hard to get your hope up sometimes because it feels safer to our heart. It's hard to risk your heart getting hurt,
Mm-hmm.
especially when things just feel like they really are life and death. And yet, that's the God we serve, is the one that says, you can risk your heart with me. Get your hope up. Um,
I think a lot
so
of that. I think some of that is people have a very earthly view of God. everyone else in their life ever has let them down. You know what I mean?
So would you
So
say
when you've
that
got
right
this,
now in today's culture, your generation and maybe Gen Z are feeling less hopeful and less willing to risk being hopeful because of what you see going on around you?
yeah, but I think it's a different and a little bit more dangerous brand of not hopeful. Um, and I think it's a little bit of a generation gap. Older millennials, when they run out of hope, it's just keep going. You know,
Mm,
just keep going, just keep doing it. I see a lot of men in this situation. If they're not married by the time they're 30 or 35, they just give up all hope on finding somebody. Um, and they just decide, I'm going to work and I'm going to have my toys and I'm going to have, a nice house eventually, but it's all going to be for me because I don't dare to hope anymore because I've been
mm,
hurt too many times. Or they look around and they don't see anyone that they feel is like someone that they want to marry. That's an entirely separate topic, but um, that's kind of like an older millennial attitude. A younger millennial and Gen Z attitude is like it's a more of a nihilistic view of things where it's like, I don't have any hope, but who cares? It doesn't matter.
hmm.
I'm just gonna do whatever. Um, it's more of a nothing matters anyway. Hope doesn't matter anymore than not having hope because there's no control over anything. It's like a
Kind
fatalistic
of fatalistic, yeah.
kind of view of things, and it's like, don't get your hopes up. I wasn't going to anyway.
No, that's it. That's even sadder.
Yeah. So, and I think that's one of the reasons it makes it that much more dangerous because if people are unwilling to even entertain the idea of hope, because I feel like there are some people that they don't dare to hope because they don't want to get hurt, like we talked about.
Right.
I think some people, so they kind of walk around in this fog where it's like it's hard. They have moments of like spikes of happiness where and whatnot, but everything they're just kind of like drummed down and they're beat up and they're kind of the classical picture of depression, for lack of a better term, where it's like, oh, things are hard. I don't know how long I can do that. That kind of like um, beat up by the world kind
Yeah.
of presence. I think that's a much easier person to reach with hope over time than somebody who's just, whatever. Eh. Because one person one person cares so much they're unwilling to risk hurt. The other person doesn't even care enough. And it's hard to teach someone to care. It's easier to bring somebody from a place of I care enough about myself to not hope, for lack of a better phrase. That's much easier to get someone from there to hoping
Mm,
than it is to get someone from I don't even care enough to hope.
I don't even
You
care
know what
about
I mean?
anything. Yeah.
Because then you have to get them to care, and getting somebody to care when they're not already is so much harder than getting somebody to hope. So I think that's one of the more difficult things when it comes to um, don't get your hopes up. That being said, the attitude of no, whatever, is especially productive when it comes to combating better safe than sorry. Because if someone says, "Oh, better safe than sorry," and someone's like, "Freaking why?" Like,
Mm,
safe is no better than sorry because it's all the same anyway. You know what I
wow.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a lot of
Mm.
people that are willing to. There's a lot of young people that are willing to engage in entrepreneurship because they're like, "So what?" Like, whatever. You
I
know what I
do think
mean?
that's a big area. I would say your generation, millennials in particular, because Gen Z is still younger and not quite ready for it. But millennials, that entrepreneur thing, um, that willingness to not get a degree, that willingness to go for a job even if you don't have a degree and sell yourself,
Mm-hmm.
or to create the business that you wish you could work for, but it
Mhm.
doesn't exist. So you just create it yourself. I know older generations have done that to some extent. Obviously, we have all these corporations had to be started by somebody, but I think, isn't it like the statistic of the amount of entrepreneurs um, right now is at an all-time high?
It's
People starting
definitely
their own
higher than it's
businesses.
been. It's definitely higher than it's been in a long time.
So would you
And there's a
say that
couple.
your generation is probably
Yeah,
more
I
willing
would.
to risk right now than the older generations?
Well, so a couple of things. One, it's going to depend on how we define entrepreneur, because some people are going to be entrepreneurial in addition to a job because they're trying to make ends meet. That's one type of entrepreneurship. The I'm willing to quit my job in order to start my business is a different level of entrepreneurship. So it depends on how, the studies are defining each one of those,
Yeah,
because, if somebody's selling t-shirts on Instagram, that could be considered entrepreneurship. But if they're doing it out of their basement while they go to work every day, that's different
right.
than
A side
someone
hustle is
who,
very different than
yeah,
a main
but they
hustle. Yeah,
both kind of fall under the definition of entrepreneurship in some ways. Um, I think a lot of it has to do with just the financial situation that a lot of people are in. Um, think about your parents. Inflation's getting harder. It's getting real hard,
yep,
but they don't have a resource to go do anything. So they're just knuckling through and trying to figure it out with what they've got, but they're not adding to anything. You know what I mean?
true.
They're
Yeah,
not adding to their financial future. Millennials
yeah,
and Gen Z, we gotta we gotta we gotta figure it out because we're gonna be here longer. You know what I
yeah.
mean? Um, so I think some of it's the times that we're in, and some of it is that the attitude of, well, just freaking do it. Just go for it. What's the worst that happens? I go back and get another job, because that's kind of the other thing is a lot of people are like, oh, it'll financially ruin you. Well, student loans already did that. So
If I'm
getting
30,
a,
35,
getting a, getting a business loan isn't going to be any worse than student loans, because you can get out of a business loan. You can't get out of a student loan. You know what
yeah,
I mean? They're a
yeah.
lot more exclusive with those. So I think the attitude, I think a lot of it does have to do with like the things that we saw growing up and the things that happened in our formative years, kind of like I said at the beginning.
Yeah. Well, I would say I would just close. I was talking with someone else about millennials because you all have my heart. And um, I was talking to them about how I think every business, every church, um, any kind of entity needs to have millennials starting to take leadership, because your generation is like, and I've said this to you before, but your generation reminds me of the early generations in our country that were like, let's just go see what's out there. There's this whole Wild West. We've never been out there. Let's get in a covered wagon and let's just go see.
Mm-hmm.
Let's build a railroad, even though we don't know where it's going to go. Let's, try to get this
Yeah.
contraption up in the air, even if it's for 10 seconds. We're just going to try it out. That pioneer spirit that this country was founded on, I'm seeing that and hearing that in millennials. And you guys are more likely than my generation to say, let's just try it. Let's try it and see if it works. If it doesn't work, we'll try something else. And if that doesn't work, we'll try something else. And I think every business needs that. I think our government needs that. I think the church needs that willingness to risk, to put yourself out there and say, I don't know if it's going to work or not, but let's give it a shot. Um, and I think that's where our future is going to be, because the old ways, we're kind of hanging on to a lot of old ways, whether it's business or education or systems in church and in evangelism and whatever. We're holding on to some old systems that don't work anymore, and we need that fresh idea of, well, yeah, let's risk, let's try that program, and if nobody comes, we'll try something else, without this big stigma of, oh, it didn't work, I'm afraid, and now I'm embarrassed. You guys have that spirit of, let's risk it, let's go for it and see what happens. And I really admire that in millennials. And I think mean, that's just my soapbox with my generation. We got to get you guys in leadership. Obviously, you need mentorship. Obviously, you need training. You're not as old and wise and some experience and need some discernment, but you guys have that willingness to risk and go for the adventure that I think the church, business, all these other entities desperately need. So, okay. Well, thanks for giving me your input on this. Good to talk to you about that. And hopefully we just encourage anybody listening, pull up this topic of risk and these 3 phrases with someone who's not in your generation and just see what conversation you can get going around these 3 phrases. And definitely, we hope everyone listening will definitely get your hopes up, people. We have a reason to be helpful. That's the big one. So, thanks for listening.
Bye.
The views expressed in this podcast are personal opinions and do not reflect those of any organization. The speakers are not licensed therapists, and their insights are based on their own experiences. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered professional advice. Listeners are encouraged to seek qualified professionals for specific guidance. And by accessing this podcast, you agree that the individuals speaking in this podcast are not liable for any outcomes or consequences that may arise as a result.